Hello and welcome to the new episode of the Daily Debate. I'm Mohammed Abdul. French President Emmanuel Macron concluded his high-level three-day state visit to Egypt on Tuesday, during which he held bilateral ties with Egyptian President Abdul al-Sisi and attended a trilateral summit which included Jordanian King Abdul II addressing the urgent situation in the Gaza Strip. He had a very busy agenda. Macron's agenda during his visit to Egypt included a message for regional peace from Al Arish city in northern Sinai, and we'll talk about that in details. His visit witnessed the launch of strategic partnership with Egypt and the signing of a number of memos of understanding in various fields of cooperation. We'll talk more about the visit from various prospects, but let's start with our top stories for tonight. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, accompanied by his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron, visited the port city of Al Arish in northern Sinai on Tuesday at the end of a three-day official visit by the French leader to Egypt. The two leaders met with the humanitarian and security workers there to demonstrate their constant mobilization in favor of a ceasefire in Gaza. They further visited injured Palestinians at Al Arish General Hospital. The visit was aimed at highlighting the humanitarian plight faced by the Palestinians in Gaza Strip. Hundreds of demonstrators headed to Arish from various Egyptian governorates to express support for President Sisi's stance regarding the displacement of Palestinians from Gaza, as well as expressing solidarity with the Palestinian people. Most international aid went through the Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt, but this has been suspended by the Israeli occupation site since early March. Also, we have the French President Emmanuel Macron writing on social media platform X Social. The French President expressed backing for the reconstruction plan by the Egyptians of the Gaza Strip. He also condemned the continuation of the Israeli bombing on Gaza and called for the freeing of all hostages and resumption of the ceasefire. The French leader said the objective is to establish a Palestinian state led by the Palestinian National Authority, stressing that peace can only be achieved through political settlements, adding that a two-state solution is pivotal to reach peace. Now let's go and watch this report, and we'll be back after the report. Stay tuned.
Wrapping up a three-day official visit to Egypt, French President Emmanuel Macron, accompanied by President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, visited Al Arish city in northern Sinai on Tuesday. The two leaders toured Al Arish General Hospital in the port city, 50 kilometers west of the Gaza Strip, where they met the medical professionals and sick and injured Palestinians being evacuated from Gaza. The French leader condemned the targeting medical and humanitarian convoys in Gaza, reiterating that reaching humanitarian aid to the besieged territory is a top priority. He urged the immediate resumption of humanitarian aid to Gaza as quickly as possible, describing the situation today as intolerable. Macron strongly condemned an Israeli attack on the paramedics and aid workers last month, carrying a bouquet of red roses to give 30 patients. The French president visited several wards as well as a play area for children. Macron office said the trip was aimed at piling pressure on Israel for reopening of crossing points for the delivery of humanitarian goods into Gaza. In a joint statement, the heads of several UN agencies said many Gazans are trapped, bombed and starved again. While at crossing points, food, medicine, fuel and shelter supplies are piling up and vital equipment is stuck outside of the blockade territory. In Cairo on Monday, President Sisi, Macron and Jordan King Abdullah II held a tripartite meeting during which they called for an immediate return to a ceasefire in Gaza. They discussed the war in Gaza and humanitarian efforts to alleviate the suffering of Gaza's 2.4 million people, the vast majority of whom have been displaced at least once during the war. The three leaders conducted a phone call with U.S. President Donald Trump to discuss the need to reach a ceasefire in Gaza and release the hostages. Earlier, President Sisi and President Macron had talks that centered on bilateral ties and regional issues including Gaza, Syria, Yemen and Sudan, as well as illegal immigration. The two leaders witnessed the signing of the memos of understanding in various domains and the elevation of bilateral ties to the level of strategic partnership. Wrapping up their activities in the Tahadiyya Palace, the two leaders held an inspection tour at El Adli Mansour Interchange Metro Station in Cairo. The two presidents were received by Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli, Minister of Transport Kamel Al-Wazir and a number of senior state officials. Later, Macron visited the Cairo University headquarters where they attended an Egyptian-French Universities Forum. During his visit to Egypt, Macron had an inspection tour with President Sisi at Cairo Metro. They also strolled through Cairo's famous district of Khan al-Khalili, where some citizens took photos with the two leaders. Also, Macron visited the Grand Egyptian Museum.
Welcome back. So that was a very busy three-day state visit for the French President Emmanuel Macron to Egypt, and we have, as we have seen in the report, lots of activities for the French President here. And let's start with his latest one, moving to El Arish today. But first, let's welcome, we're joined by Dr. Mohammed Abdul Halim, member of Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Dr. Mohammed, let's start with the move to El Arish city today, accompanied by President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. And what does that stand for? What's the message behind that? And considering many statements by the French President in El Arish.
Right. To begin with, actually, I mean, that sort of state visit and his own part, Mr. President Emmanuel Macron, at this particular and very much crucial time, you know, I mean, of Netanyahu's existence at Washington, D.C., as much as the sort of the escalation that did take place a day after another, actually, for more than 17 months in Gaza Strip, would acquire, you know, I mean, prime place among all other visits, actually, insofar as, you know, I mean, he seemed to be quite, you know, I mean, assuming permanent membership actually in the UN Security Council, as much as possessing the right of saying his own say about what he would like to say, that is the veto actually. Being the second largest European country, immediately after Germany actually, France would seem to be quite very much endorsing the sort of the strategic steps that had been taken and had been endorsed by His Own Excellency, Mr. President Fattah el-Sisi, actually, that had been crowned with today's visit, actually, to El Arish, as much as, you know, Rafah crossing that seemed to be demolished on the other side by the Israeli troops. The sort of the visit at this particular time, I mean, you know, I mean, directing his own journey towards that sort of very much dangerous place, so to speak, is a clear testimony on the fact and on the part of His Own Excellency's advent and arrival, actually, insofar as it will give us a clear indication of how those people are very much concerned and very much interested, actually, of pushing forward the peace process and of, you know, documenting, actually, the sort of the the results and the sort of the outcomes that had been reached to during the course of the Arab League summit during the course of the last March, and much the same way that it would give a clear indication to the Western community at large of how, France, despite the fact that, it had been humiliated actually by the President Donald Trump at one time during his own first tenure. He was, lagging behind to a greater extent, and the mutual identification between both countries were not on good terms. That's why his own advent at that particular stage to El Arish particularly is a clear indication and a clear testimony to his own approval, of his own endorsement, of his own acceptance, and of his own wide, endorsement of the acceptance of the peace process, of the stoppage of the fire, of the battle, as much as reaching to what you might call a permanent ceasefire between both parties, the Israeli side, as much as the Palestinian, as represented by Hamas on the other, as much as, pushing the whole negotiation into a negotiative route rather than any military action, actually, on either part. It seems to be quite a very much crucial visit, state visit, that would endorse and clarify to the whole Western world of how important the step is and how endorsement the sort of the French state as being represented by Emmanuel Macron is and would be. And in the future, actually, it would be a clear testimony to one main fundamental fact, which is the power of the Egyptian presidency, actually, of recruiting, of, representing the final say about the whole thing at the end of the day. During the course of the last week, Kaya Kallas, the supreme interrogator of the European Union, was visiting Egypt by Mr. Badr Lati, the foreign minister. And the sort of the visit that had been enacted by His Own Excellency Mr. President Fattah al-Sisi to Spain during the course of the last months, as much as to Norway, to Oslo, to Madrid, and a large number of European countries would give us a clear indication that he has got the power of saying it whenever he would like to say that he would be very much recruiting almost all these superpowers facing the decision of the relocation, of the displacement of the Gazans, actually, at that particular crucial stage of the history of the Middle East. Things that
concerning displacement, the French president, as well as the Egyptian president Abdul Fattah al-Sisi, stressed condemnation of displacement of Palestinians. I call it ethnic cleansing, that's the right term, anyway, as well as other strong statements by the French president, condemned targeting medical and humanitarian convoys in Gaza, reiterating that reaching humanitarian aid to the besieged territory is top priority. The French president also said urged the immediate resumption of the humanitarian aid to Gaza as quickly as possible, describing the situation today as intolerable. How far you think these statements are serious, and how far you think they can lead to, a development that could hold Israelis accountable?
Right, to a greater extent, during the course of the last 2 or 3 years, the relations between the Egyptian side as much as the French side were not on good terms, were not the highest, because actually of some attempts on the part of the Turkish side, as much as the Muslim Brotherhood, to, to try to deviate our own intentions and political decision taking, actually, from being on good terms with France through the the religious offences for, what you might call the very much offensive portraits of Prophet Mohammed sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, that thwarted actually the sort of relations. But nowadays it seemed to be quite that almost because of the extreme sense of awareness and the deep concern of almost all the Egyptians of what is besieging them, of danger, of threatening voices, of menaces, that they would seem to be quite, looking on the bright side, actually, of creating good diplomatic relations, as it is to be attested to by his own endorsement and his own declarations, that is Emmanuel Macron, of how it seem to be quite very much important of reaching and of transmitting the humanitarian and the human aids, actually, despite the fact that the Israeli side did demolish the other side of Rafah crossing, on the other side that is to be captured and seized by the Israelis. But, you know, I mean, Emmanuel Macron is insisting every now and again of representing his own personal point of view of how, you know, I mean, demolishing the intents and the intentions actually of the Israeli are, and how, you know, I mean, the sense of the damage and the demolition that did occur would seem to be quite dehumanizing facts and effects actually to the world community at large. As you might have said rightly now, the genocidal attempts, the sort of the massacre deaths and the sort of the atrocities and the act of burying, you know, I mean, the alive, all these things would seem to be quite, in the international law, a sort of a crime that would have to be, you know, retributed as part of the International Criminal Court. But to our own amazement, to our own astonishment, actually, he did visit the Magar as much as today's visit to Washington, D.C., being endorsed by, Donald Trump. And the sort of declaration between the both presidents actually would seem to be quite amazing for almost all the world. On his own part, Donald Trump, did reiteratively repeat again and again the sort of, turning Gaza Strip into a Middle East Riviera. And in the meantime insisted on really displacing and of relocating the Gazans out of it. And he did talk about the act of stoppage of the atrocities and of the act of killing, but he didn't denote which is which and what is what and who is who is supposed to be demolished.
Taking of the stance of the American President Donald Trump that there was a tripartite summit between Egyptian President Abdul Fattah al-Sisi, Jordanian King Abdullah II, and the French President Emmanuel Macron. And after that, there was a phone call from the American President to all of them. What do you think went on in that phone call?
The phone call was, I wouldn't say very much promising. I wouldn't say, optimistic, rather than being promising. It's very much realistic about the status quo. At the time that the three presidents that you have rightly mentioned now, that is King Abdullah II, Emmanuel Macron, and His Own Excellency, Mr. President Fattah al-Sisi, are insisting every now and again on the peaceful road towards the initiation and of the act of denying the relocation to a greater extent, the other side would go to the extreme further part of it. That is, the insistence of now and again on the act of displacing the Gazans, as much as, talking about, some visionary aspects of driving the indigenous citizens, the Palestinians, out of their own homeland. And in the meantime, they would have to be, forced to live in somewhere else. But he didn't allocate the certain individual countries that would abide them in them. But in the meantime, what seems to be quite amazing is, the act of exchanging some words between both presidents. That's Netanyahu on the one hand and Donald Trump on the other, about, the willing displacement, whereas it's a sort of very much forceful and forcing them actually to leave their own homelands against almost all their own aspirations and wishes and against their own will. In the meantime, they would have to be, according to his own words, that's Donald Trump, find somewhere else to start their own life in and to turn the whole place into a peaceful setting, being as much as to be viewed on and upon as a real estate, renovator. It seems to be quite as a merchandised item to be bought and to be sold actually by a man who doesn't possess the right to say yes or no.
So is it that the American President Donald Trump is not listening to whatever has been told to him and expressed and stressed by Egyptians, by Arabs all the time?
I would really say that he is insisting every now and again on achieving the map of the road according to his own individual sort of thinking, side by side with endorsement on the part of the Israeli side. That what seemed to be quite from the body language, from the pictures, from the exchanging of the words, and the sort of the phone call, and the sort of the reiteratively repeated words on his own part, about, the insistence of, driving out of their own hands the Gazans, as much as of turning the whole thing into a very nice, attractive, and very much enticing sort of Rivera in the Middle East, to be invested in such a way as to be, targeted by the American and to be maneuvered actually by the American administration. Insisting on saying and calling it no man's land, whereas the people are still there. The indigenous Palestinians are still living despite the fact of the demolition and the act of destruction of almost their own houses and residences. Actually, there is still of living in there, of continuing their own life in there, and even of insisting on dying in there. A clear testimony to the fact that of how resilient those people are, and of how the Egyptian presidency actually is fortifying and stabilizing them in their own misfortunes and in their mishaps, actually, so to speak, side by side, assisted by the Jordanian King Abdullah II's insistence on, standing against the relocation, as much as Emmanuel Macron's humanitarian attitude of solidifying. But the inevitable question, which inevitably arises at the end of the day, what it seemed to be quite viable, actually, that the American side by side with the Israeli side, represent their own endorsement of that sort of agreement that had been reached to and agreed on and upon by the Arab League summit on the 3rd of March, as much as the phone call that had been exchanged between two, because it seems to be quite that we are talking about two extreme directions opposite to each other. The one would insist, that is the Egyptian as much as the Jordanian, on the initiative road and on the peaceful initiations, actually, of talking, of sitting together, of examining almost all the disputes, and of putting an end for the struggles and the tussles, and to the act of changing the captives and the, the hostages, actually. Whereas the other part, that is the American, subsidized and assisted by the Israeli side, would insist on the act of driving the people out of their own homeland. So it seems to be quite that you are talking in two opposite directions, actually. And it is in the world of politics called the chicken game, actually, both of which are very much directing their own way towards one individual sort of attitude. The one who would be deviated will be saved at the end of the day, whereas the other is taken his or its own way towards its own final destination. So I think that negotiations are the only way through the area.
And the three leaders trust this, that negotiations should be the only way out of this, devastating situation in the region. And after these statements from the French President Emmanuel Macron, what's next? Do we expect a move from France, from the EU countries, towards, some sort of pushing the Israelis to go back to, negotiations again and resume the ceasefire agreement?
Being the second largest power in Europe, immediately after Germany, and assigning and assuming what you might call a permanent membership, actually, in the UN Security Council, possessing a large number of decision-taking and decision-making processes, actually, I think that after his own advent and his own return again to his own homeland, Emmanuel Macron will be endorsing the fact that he had reached to, particularly the very much warm, welcoming reception on the part of the Egyptian presidency, as much as the indigenous Egyptian people, actually, would, very much welcoming him at Khan el-Khalili and receiving a very much delicious sort of dinner, negotiating and experiencing the heart-welcoming notes on the part of the Eastern people, actually, and the sense of serenity, the sense of peace that as much as tolerance that he was passing in Khan el-Khalili ways, and the sort of the serenity of the mind and the peace of the mind, actually, that he was to be received with all these nice, gestures, would leave a very good indication, not only on the individual man particularly, but actually his own people, particularly his own, page he did write on the X, that I really thank very much Mr. President Fattah al-Sisi, as much as his own people, for the very warm welcome and reception, actually, that they did receive. And in the meantime, one of the very much interesting notes that he was to be receiving his own, dinner at, Naguib Mahfouz's coffee shop as much as restaurant, a sort of a very much welcoming note.
So could all that lead to some French or European initiative to push the Israelis back to resume the ceasefire?
Clarifying the issue for almost all the European world, as much as, exploiting all these gestures of hospitality on the part of those nice kind people actually would give the impression to the Western world that this is a place that is very much far away from terrorism. It's a very much safe place for tourism in the meantime, for attracting tourists not only from Paris but actually from almost all the world. All these gestures actually on the part of that sort of state visit, on the part of Emmanuel Macron, will be in somehow or another endorsing and very much fortifying and pushing the idea of peace negotiations actually. Even for the Western world, it's in a very much simple way. It looks as though that you were talking to the other people that, well, look here, this is a kind of a very much peaceful territorial land, free from attacks, free from terrorism, free from all, sabotages and acts of demolition. Particularly, he himself, Emmanuel Macron, was very much an ardent believer of the revolution of the 23rd of June of 1952, because it seems to be quite, according to his own words, free from bloodshed, from sabotage, from, devastating aspects, very much contradictory to the French Revolution as it stands, because it ended in the act of, assassinating Louis XVI, as much as the death of Marie Antoinette. Far from being, so the Egyptian revolutions being stemming out from very much peaceful sort of people who are endorsing and harping on even now and again on peaceful negotiations. And I think that sort of state visit is very much strategic at this particular, not only from the economic point of view, but from strategic point of view in the meantime, on cultural dimensions as well.
Yes, we'll come to these points, but let's go for a report, and we'll be back after the report to talk about, strategic and economic aspects of the visit. Stay tuned.
Egypt and France have enjoyed strategic ties that bind the two friendly nations and elevated their ties to strategic partnership during the current visit by French President Emmanuel Macron to Cairo. The two sides witnessed the signing of a number of memorandums of understanding in various domains of cooperation. Egypt aims to attract $1 billion in new French investments during 2025, focusing on 8 key sectors, bringing total French investments in the country to $8 billion. These plans come as French President Emmanuel Macron visited Egypt, where he engaged in discussions with President Abdul al-Sisi on political and economic matters of mutual interest. Prime Minister Dr. Mustafa Madbouli, alongside several ministers, met with a French delegation accompanying Macron to present a range of investment opportunities and benefits Egypt offers to foreign investors. The new investments are expected to target sectors including new and renewable energy, transportation, pharmaceuticals, food industries, communications and information technology, engineering, automotive and chemicals. The two countries also signed several agreements related to higher education, energy, food, industries, logistics, pharmaceuticals, infrastructure, information technology and artificial intelligence. Trade relations between Egypt and France have strengthened, with bilateral trade increasing by 14.7% in 2024, reaching $2.9 billion, up from $2.5 billion the previous year. Key Egyptian exports to France last year included electrical appliances, fertilizers, mineral fuels, clothing and agricultural products, whilst French exports to Egypt featured aviation products, vehicles, machinery and dairy items. A few weeks ago, Minister of Planning, Economic Development and International Cooperation, Rania Al-Mashot, held a meeting with the French ambassador to Egypt, Eric Chevalier, to discuss the future of Egyptian-French economic ties. The talks focused on recent financing agreements for development projects and partnership priorities in the coming period. Mashot highlighted the strong ties binding Egypt and France, emphasizing the progress made in implementing key development projects across priority sectors.
Welcome back. So elevating bilateral ties between France and Egypt to strategic level, what does that mean, and what could be the impact of that on France and Egypt?
Well, normally diplomatic relations and consulatic ties between a couple of countries may be as much as normal as can be. That is exchanging merchandised items, the sort of the commercial agreements and the memorandum of understanding. But when, the sort of the exigency of the relationship between two countries would reach to what you might call a strategic partnership, it's the highest level that both countries could reach to. That is exchanging powers, weaponries, as much as it is to be attested to by the sort of the escorting of his own advent, Mr. President Emmanuel Macron, to Egypt by Rafale, as much as receiving a couple of Rafale fighters, actually, in today's terms. That's why, I think reaching to that sort of, very much high advancement and technological aspects and modern technological means and very much modern weaponries, actually, of exchanging the highest technology of receiving, the Rafale, fighters is a clear testimony to how, deep the sort of relation between both countries is and would reach to. In addition to the strategic sort of partnership between both countries, actually, you can really find that Emmanuel Macron himself is very much keen to represent how much investment is to be dedicated to the sort of relationship between both Egypt and France, as much as the economic bilateral ties that would reach also to the highest achievements and prospects anticipated, reminding us every now and again in today's visit, of how, France was a leading country of initiating since more than 30 or 40 years the metro or the underground. It was the first step towards actually taking the very much advanced roads towards to facilitating and easing, means of communication and transportation actually in a country that was very much dense in popularity or dense in population, so to speak. So, in the meantime, there was a memorandum of understanding between both countries to establish, a hospital very much specialized in treating, cancer, as much as the Francophone, around 100 schools of Francophone, actually, just by way of initiating and establishing the French culture, which is not very much alien, is not very much bizarre or exceptional to the Egyptian people, because we had been, for quite some time, a French colony, as much as being British. But the difference between these and that, the British is very much exploitative, very much draining the fortunes of the Egyptian land, whereas, the French would seem to be quite very much harping every now and again on cultural aspects of civilized techniques of life, despite the fact that I would really agree with you that most of them are commonly called imperialistic point of view, so to speak, but the fact remains that the realistic touches, as much as the cultural details that had been left on the Egyptian people, would seem to be quite a bit better in their own interests rather than the British way of life.
So lots of common grounds and joint projects between Egypt and France, and the French President Emmanuel Macron in a press conference with the Egyptian President Abdul al-Sisi said that France is the biggest European economic partner to Egypt, away from the oil and energy sector, with more than 7 billion euros investments. And they are working on increasing that number to almost 13 or 14 billion euros. And as you said before, lots of agreements and memos of understanding has been signed or have been signed in this visit of the French president to Egypt. In your opinion, what is the most important part that Egypt can benefit from France when it comes to industry? And Egypt is working hard to localize industry in Egypt in various domains, especially in cars industry.
Right. But this is a point that had been stressed on an opponent, that very much interesting sort of meeting between His Excellency, Mr. President Abdul al-Sisi, as much as Emmanuel Macron, during their own journey into the metro, when there was a negotiation and a sort of a very interesting discussion about the minimization of the sort of the cost to 10% actually, And His Excellency, Mr. President Fattah Sisi, would insist on saying that I'm not going to accept it. You would have to endorse the minimization of the taxes as much as the charges actually of building factories of high modern technological aspects, as much as France is actually. His own aim is actually to leave Egypt is on an equal footing with technological details as much as France is. And this is one of the very much admirable signs of mastery on the part of the presidential authority actually. In much the same way that agreed deal of investment, intentions of investing, millions and millions of dollars, of euros actually on the green energy, on the artificial intelligence, as much as hydrogenated aspects of clarifying, the air, as much as the sort of the power and the energy. So France, as the stance, is very much interested in the Egyptian land, not only from economic point of view, not only from strategic point of view, but with the aim of reaching to the heart of Africa as well, because it seems to be quite the very much direct and very much straightforward way of, of competing in, the American colonization, of getting into the heart of Africa. Egypt would seem to be the main gate through the aid of which France could be in, rather than being out. And in this lies one of the major, strategic benefit and mutual concern and mutual sort of benefit for both countries actually. They would seem to be quite providing us with modern technological details of Rafale, of submarines in the near future, in much the same way that Egypt will be in somehow or another propagating the sort of their own advancement into the heart of Africa, also for the mutual interest. In the world of politics, there isn't what you might call a final gain or ultimate sort of loss or ultimate sort of, loss of losing something, but there is a sort of intermediate way between this and that. And within the world of politics as well, as much as Winston Churchill did say at one time that there isn't sort of an absolute sense of hatred or sort of extreme sort of love, but mutual interest of mutual benefit for both sides. And that's why, post-presidents would seem to be quite very much, agreeing with each other of adding to one another, of benefiting to each other, as much as of directing, as much as their own channeling their own intentions actually towards the peaceful roads of rejecting relocation, of their own denial of displacement, as much as of their own insistence of, of the act of the return of their indigenous citizens to Gaza again, as much as being in their residence, while the act of reconstruction again to be resumed. The sort of the thing that Emmanuel Macron was very much endorsing to a greater extent, side by side with King Abdullah II of Jordan actually.
Yes, of course. And back to economy and industry, there were news that France could start soon having some kind of joint project with Egypt to produce the Rafale fighters. What do you think? How serious is that? And what would that mean to Egypt and France?
Well, this is the strategic partnership actually in the real sense of the word. A sort of a sign of a goodwill that had been indicated and had been, reproduced before, because we do have and we do possess the Rafale fighters, in addition to the fact that in today's terms we will be receiving, if not we have received, another category of the Rafale. The sort of the thing that Mr. President Emmanuel Macron did endorse during his own entrance into the Egyptian sky, actually being escorted by the Rafale fighters.
Yes.
French fabricated and being, directed through the Egyptian pilots, actually, which, according to his own words, a sign of a very much straightforward and direct strategic partnership between both countries. And I think that France is very much, despite the fact that, some political observers would say about something about their own leniency towards the Israeli side, but I think that the language of the mutual benefit and the mutual interest and the mutual economic ties that would bind both Egyptian side as much as the French, that would lead our own future movements towards providing us with modern technological means, as much as the weaponry is the case that had been attested to and clarified by our own acceptance and endorsement of the Rafale fighters, actually, so to speak.
Yeah, so it was not just politics, it was not just economy, it was also cultural aspects for this visit by the French president. And there were lots of, agreements signed in that field, especially cooperation between Egyptian universities and French universities. How far you think that will work for the best interest of both countries?
Well, investment is not only in economics. It's also in education, because that seems to be one of the highest targets that any single individual sort of country would aspire to, that is reaching to the highest levels of education, of degrees, of achieving, astrological maneuvering experiences, as much as reaching to the space, stage. This is a sort of a step that had been endorsed by the Egyptian presidency. The meeting at Cairo University, actually, is a clear testimony to the fact that he himself is very much, that's Emmanuel Macron, so to speak, interested of exchanging scholarships, actually, between both countries. They would seem to be interested in the Oriental side of life, of bringing students of higher studies, actually, to be highly educated in Egypt about Orientalism, about, things that Egypt is representing a good and very much admirable rightness at and mastery in much same way that Egyptian scholars would seem to be quite, reaching to the highest technological details and highest degrees attainable at their own disposal by traveling to Sorbonne, to, a large number of universities, renowned and very much famous ones in Paris, in France in general, a sort of a thing that would be very much admirable, are very much a striking sort of mastery of exchanging bilateral ties and cultural details, particularly, as I've just said at the very beginning of the episode, that they have had a first-hand knowledge about experiences in Egypt, about Oriental touches, and about the sort of the visit to the Great Museum, actually, just by way of enriching the great history that had been once in there between the Egyptian side on one side as much as the French on the other.
Yeah, talking of the Grand Egyptian Museum, expected to officially be opened at July the 3rd. How far you think it will add to Egyptian economy, and of course the French president as well as other leaders of the world will be there at the opening?
Well, to my own understanding, almost all the superpowers and the great countries, including the states, as much as France, Germany, Italy, and almost all these superpowers would seem to be quite knowing the real worth of the Egyptian state, because during the course of the visit of the last Joe Biden to Egypt a couple of years ago, in a very short meeting between himself on the hand, as much as His Excellency Mr. President Fattah al-Sisi, he did say that Egypt is the mother of the whole world, a clear testimony to the fact that he really knows the ins and outs of Egypt, of the monuments of Egypt, of the Egyptian presidency, and of the power that the Egyptian state would entail in the Middle East, of the decision taking, of the decision making, of its own ability to say yes and no whenever it would seem to be quite very much suitable for its own presidential authority to say so in the right time and in the right place in the meantime. Concerning the sort of visit to the
the Grand
Egyptian Museum, actually, I think that France, as it stands as a sort of a very much cultural sort of country, is very much interested in the monuments of Egypt, of the historical details, of the instantaneous, very much deep religious relics and ancient historical ties, actually, that would bind this and that between both countries, in much the same way that I think almost all the Western world and European countries are very much interested of knowing something about the pyramids, about the pharaohs, about the ancient historical details that are very much enticing and fascinating to them, carrying cultural touches side by side with the arid and the stark diplomacy, actually, and the military attitudes and the military weaponries that would seem to be quite exchanged. There is what you might call the soft power, the cultural touches that would be, a clear testimony of how peaceful that sort of land is, Egypt, so to speak, how interested its own people in the sort of the mutual identification with the other Western world are, as much as how, very much resourceful its own presidential authority is in tackling and of dealing of not only, concerns and issues of the Middle East, but perhaps of almost the whole world, being the role of, a mediator as much as an initiator of almost all the decision-taking processes, actually, that might be of a great concern for the Western world, as much as it had been clarified and attested to by, the problematic situation of the illegal immigration and, and the coronavirus, actually, and the previous dilemmas, actually, that had been there, devastating the whole world, of which the Egyptian presidency was very much stretching a very good hand, a very good helping hand, not only for the Eastern world, but for the Western as well.
Yes, so that was really, indeed, a very important visit from the French President Emmanuel Macron to Egypt, 3-day state visit to Egypt that was concluded today. Dr. Mohammed Abdul Halim, a member of the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure, sir.
Thanks for watching us. Stay tuned for what is coming on the Nile TV International. See you soon.